Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I was waiting for 100 faces to show up, but I realized we are in webinar mode. And folks are, I see the numbers ticking up here as folks join by the second. So on behalf of the IDAC, International Data Alliance for Children on the Move Innovation Working Group, I am thrilled to welcome you here. If you're new to IDAC, we'll drop a link in the chat so you can read more about it. But this innovation working group is co-led by Save the Children and UNICEF, and we'll hear more about our guests and our panelists in a moment. But Kiriaki here and myself, Michael, we are here on behalf of the UNICEF Frontier Data Network, and we'll be your guides and hosts for today's session. I'll be on the screen. Kiriaki will be in the chat. Speaking of the chat, please introduce yourselves. The chat should be open. We know there are nearly 400, if now not over 400 colleagues across the sector who have said they're interested in this topic, who care about children on the move and data challenges related to children on the move. So we would love to hear what brought you here and where you are coming from, whether that's the organization or geography. We are eager to get a sense of the room, as I think you are. We have, I think, nearly every time zone covered. So we'll see what records we can set. But please do. Thank you. I see some. Thanks for those who have just braved the whoever was first in the chat here. It looks like someone from Save Norway. Thanks for being first. Okay. With that, just a quick note on what this is the first of a brand new series. We're pretty excited about it. The idea is that we bring together practitioners, researchers, anyone really innovating on ways to push the boundaries of how AI and new data technologies can support children on the move, in particular areas impacted by displacement. So our goal with these sessions, and again, I'll share more later about what's coming next, but our goal for all of these is to encourage more collaboration and action so that we can start surfacing new solutions, new opportunities, and all in the spirit of solving actual real world challenges. So on the call today, we have, and in the room, broadly, not just among our speakers, we have technical experts, we have data scientists, we have data owners, implementing agencies, partners at country and international levels, all to find new ways to work on these challenges. So we are looking for your ideas on what the challenges are and what some of the solutions are as well. So if you have thoughts on additional topics and sessions that we need to be covering in this series, please do reach out. And we are capturing everything from the chat as well. So we will look forward to hearing that. Welcome those continuing to join. Okay. I want to make sure we get ourselves into the good stuff here. So today, as you know, we are hearing about diverse data sets, how a combination of different data can be combined to address conflict-induced child displacement. So we have two folks on the screen who will be doing a lot more talking shortly. Doug here, Doug Lejour, is a senior researcher and data scientist at the University of Oxford. He leads the Now POP project there, which is set up to develop methods for up-to-date population estimation in data-sparse contexts. So we will hear from Doug about how he and his team are using innovative data sources, from satellite imagery to digital footprints, to do nowcasting and better population estimation. Will, somewhere else on your screen here, brings a practitioner focus. He's been at Save the Children International and working in the sector for, I think, over 15 years now. He leads the predictive displacement project. And so we're going to hear how his team at Save the Children uses data science to predict the scale, demographics, and geography of displacement. And I think from the chat, Will has brought many fans along from Save the Children who are joining today as well, which is wonderful. But both are going to speak about their work to date. We're going to ask them some questions about what the problem is, what is the current state of their work and their project, and then perhaps most interesting is what's unfinished, and that's where we'll ask you all to come in with your ideas, with your feedback, with opportunities to take these projects to the next level. So please just to look ahead, we're gonna use the Q&A tool, which hopefully everyone has that button on the bottom of their screen or mobile device, wherever you are, where you can, as a question comes to mind, we may not answer it immediately, but we want to start capturing them as the discussion unfolds. So please use that chat feature, or sorry, please use the Q&A feature. We will also have the chat going where we can continue to chat and say hello and say whatever else comes to mind. And but we're going to try to focus on that Q&A button to capture the questions for Will and Doug. I think that's it. We're recording this session, so if you're joining later, welcome to you in the future for joining the recording, and so that those of us on this call can share what we heard with our colleagues. Okay, let's dive in. And why don't we start? Let's start with Doug. Can you give us a sense? Tell us what. As you may be popping up a few slides as we dig in here, but why is, the question for both of you, why is population estimation or prediction a problem or such a need for addressing the challenges of children on the move? Doug, kick us off.
Okay, great. It's a very good question. While I pull my slides up, I just have a couple of slides here. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Michael and Kyriaki for organizing the conversation. I think it's really an important conversation to be having, and I'm excited to be here and talk about our work and get all of your feedback. So I'm going to assume, unless Michael, you jump in, that you can see my slides.
We can.
Yeah. So the title of the slide deck is Humanitarian Population Nowcasting in a Digital World. And I think everybody here probably recognizes some of the developing opportunities from digital data that we can use for population estimation. But I want to start just kind of defining this term population nowcasting. So my group at Oxford, we asked this very basic question. Who is located where on the landscape? And we're asking that question for now. So currently, what is the population looking like? Where are people and why are they there? So if we pull up a picture and look at this landscape of buildings, we might ask a super simple question: how many people live in this area? We might ask, can we break that down by age and sex? Are there more people in some neighborhoods than others? Are there more children in some neighborhoods than others? And why might that be? So could it be, proximity to schools or other drivers? Now, if I tell you that this is the Gaza Strip, the question changes a bit. So now we're kind of adding on top of this, what do these populations need at the moment? And getting up to date, near real-time estimates of the age, sex demographics is really important to help answering this question because different age groups need different things. And so to answer these types of questions, there's all kinds of new data available to us. There's data from satellite remote sensing on real-time estimates of building damage and things like this. And then lots of people are walking around with a smartphone in their pocket, or just an old cell phone that's connecting, to the cell tower. And this creates a stream of digital trace data that we can use for population estimation. Now, when we're talking about child populations, I think everyone recognizes, and I think many of you in the room have more experience than I do, that child populations are particularly vulnerable populations, have unique needs. So this could be protection needs, nutrition needs, it could be needs for education for displaced children. And so this is a population that requires special consideration. And when we're talking about all of these new opportunities that digital data and AI are giving us for humanitarian response, I just want to start by acknowledging that children leave fewer digital traces behind. And this is one of the challenges that we're trying to think about and work together to find answers, because some of the advancements we're making with adult populations are a bit more difficult to use for quantifying child populations. So this is sort of the basic problem that we're coming together to try to address, so we can bring some of those advancements that we're making in population estimation to better serve displaced child populations. I'll turn it back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Doug. And yeah, from your perspective, Will, you work with colleagues in the field, you've been in the field yourself. Um, why, from your perspective, why is estimation and prediction a problem that we need better solutions for?
Sure. Just to say also, Douglas, I'm really excited to hear more. That's so relevant to our work. I really, I'm really glad we got linked up together here. So for Save the Children, I mean, the core of what we're talking about here is this, the core of the problem is this absolutely exponential growth in displacement. I mean, we hit over 120 million last year. I think it's nearly 3 times where we were maybe 15 years ago. And it's not just that there's more people displaced, it's also displacement's lasting longer. I it's 20 years average now for refugees, 10 for internal displacement. Which means that if you're a child, if you're born into displacement or you become displaced, there's a good chance you'll spend your entire childhood displaced. And this is we're in this time period where we're still, these are the days still before climate change really starts to sink its teeth in. I mean, some estimates for future displacement, say by 2050, I mean, the numbers are wild. I mean, I daren't say them out loud. They're so big, you know? Now, obviously, I don't need to convince this crowd that mass displacement is a problem, but I do, and Douglas touched on this. Yeah, I want to highlight this hugely disproportionate impact on children. So yeah, on safety protection issues while they're displaced, but also the long-term health, education, etc. outcomes, they're all hugely affected. And particularly for girls, like if you are born if you're a girl born into displacement in 2025, you are really starting the board in absolutely one of the worst positions possible. So Save the Children is obviously responding to displacement ever increasingly, but how effective we are, how effective we can be, how effective any agency can be, is limited by the how good its data is. Where do we go, when, what resources and services. Like if we don't know where people are, we can't help them. And if we get it wrong, we've misallocated our increasingly limited resources. So my project, Predictive Displacement, it's about using a predictive analytics, data science, these tools that are actually increasingly commonplace in other sectors, but have some catching up to do here. Yeah, can we apply this to the displacement problem space? How many people will be displaced? How many of them are children, women and girls, other vulnerable groups? And then crucially, where will they go? Where should we expect to see these arrivals? Where should we be ready and waiting? Because if we have that, then yeah, our work becomes that much more efficient. And unfortunately, in this sector right now, we do need to be working at how to do more with less. And that's what this project is a part of. It's part of that broader anticipatory action agenda about trying to, become more effective and more efficient at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I think I've found that people outside of this space are often shocked that getting accurate data is quite difficult given the amount of data that is swirling about on um, so many people's lives who are in different in otherwise different circumstances in different countries than the populations we're talking about. So knowing that some of that technology exists out there, Doug, maybe you can take us through a bit about your some of your work addressing this challenge, and then we'll take a deeper dive into Will's project as well.
Okay, yep, I would love to. And yeah, Will, I just want to return the comment that it's super exciting to hear what you're doing. And as I mentioned a bit, for us as academics, we don't have the on the ground experience and context that you all are bringing, and so we're a bit naive in that way, and need these partnerships to be able to learn from you and understand where we can best plug in to help solve some problems. So let me just continue these slides, and again, Michael, just jump in if you can't see my screen. Um, my group, we are using remote sensing and digital trace data for population estimation. And we think about this in a lot of contexts. So we really started looking at census support in developing countries, not necessarily in a conflict context. But when the large scale Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, we realized that some of the work we were doing collecting digital trace data was powerful for estimating populations and displacement in Ukraine. So I'll tell you a little bit about that work to begin with. So we kind of started in this area using targeted advertising data from Facebook. And so this type of data is intended for advertisers to help them put their advertisements in front of the right audience on Facebook and Instagram. And this is a live data stream that anybody with a Facebook account can query. And what you get, so you can ask for a count of active users over the past 24-hour period who have been active on Facebook or Instagram. And you can ask that by location, by sex, by age. This is limited to 13 and above, people who have a Facebook account, and other characteristics like language and education level. And so, for example, we have some computing infrastructure set up for other projects, and we started collecting information like how many women between the ages of 40 and 49 were active on Facebook in the past 24 hours in the city of Kyiv. And then we can collect that information all across Ukraine every day and get a time series that can help us estimate population. When working with this type of data, the first thing that you have to acknowledge is that these data are biased. So we're only looking at the population who are on Facebook. And so our challenge was developing methodology to account for that bias and to estimate total populations, including people who are not on Facebook, and that includes children. So to give you just a quick picture, I won't go through the method. I put the citation at the bottom if you want to read the paper. Basically, what we're doing is producing daily population estimates, looking at places that have lost population, so shown in red, and places that have gained population in blue. We're breaking that down by age and sex that you can see in the population pyramids on the right. And we could see that women were making their movement choices differently than men and retirees. And that's likely because in Ukraine, men couldn't leave the country and women could. So one big assumption that we had to make here is because we had no data on children, we assumed that children were traveling with their mothers, and we just applied the kind of baseline children per woman ratio that we had from the baseline population statistics, and we indirectly estimated children based on where we were seeing reproductive age women going. So it was an indirect estimation based on some assumptions. And we want to do better at that. Through this project, so we started this data collection the day after the Russian invasion, and it took us about 3 weeks to get the method working well. And at that time, the estimate of total internal displacement in Ukraine was 1.6 million people. And we were working with IOM and OCHA at the time. Our estimate at that time was 5.3 million people, which was massively larger. And IOM did their first round of telephone surveys about the same time, and their estimate was about 6 million people. So triangulating across these data sets gave confidence to revise the estimate of internally displaced. And that went into the first flash appeal for Ukraine, and just kind of changed the scale of the funding request. We've then been involved also in Gaza, and we were using this same approach with some modifications, collecting numbers of active users in these 5 municipalities that are highlighted in yellow on the map, and using those as an indicator of population movements across Gaza. And we could capture the broad kind of population displacement that was happening. We figured out some tricks to get finer scale data out of the Facebook marketing data. So we got this down to municipality level. And right about that time, which was right in the middle of the evacuation of Rafah, Facebook ended the data stream that we were using for this. And this had been a stable data stream for years. I mean, we have a 5-year time series of this data. And so we lost that data signal right in the middle of the Rafah evacuation. And so my next big point here is that these data streams are unstable. And I might even say that most, if not all, data streams are unstable. And so this is something we need to be thinking about. So this caused us to start looking for other solutions. And when there was a polio outbreak in Gaza and the World Health Organization started the first round of polio vaccinations, they then had access to areas of the Gaza Strip that were otherwise inaccessible. And we started talking to them about sharing data. And when a child is vaccinated for polio, they, as you all probably know, they receive a mark on their finger, this purple mark. And then there's a survey done afterwards to estimate the proportion of children that have the mark. And there's a really well-developed literature on population estimation from mark recapture techniques. And so we got that data set and developed some kind of modifications of that approach to estimate child populations in Gaza. And we've now done that across all 3 rounds of the polio vaccination campaign. And so this is an example of the digital trace data sort of failing us and more traditional on the ground data stepping in to fill that gap. So data are very diverse, and I think we need to remember this and not lose sight of the more traditional data sets. So just a last slide, my group, we use a lot of these kind of advanced remote sensing products and digital trace data, like the advertising data I just showed you, but also web searches, so what you're typing into Google, mobile network activity, so where your cell phone is connecting, and then remotely sensed buildings and building damage, conflict events, and things like this. But at the heart of this, I think for humanitarian response, it's the linkage of all these things together, and the on-the-ground data, in my mind, are really kind of the linchpin. And so we're really thinking a lot now about how do we start to bring these different kind of individual projects we've done together and try to link these data sets. And we're doing this now in Gaza, trying to link the polio vaccination data to digital trace data so that we get the sort of benefits of both together. So we get the good, robust estimates of child populations from polio data, and we get the real-time updates from digital trace data. But getting those linked together is very challenging, and that's that's where we are now. That's the challenge that I want to pose to all of you, and talk about how do we take a next step to kind of solve that together. And yeah, let me turn it back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that last point. Thank you for introducing some of that methodology. Super interesting use of diverse data sets that I'm sure many of us on the call were not already imagining. Will, you've taken a different approach and with some shared aims, but from a different direction. And you're muted. Go ahead and rewind to the beginning of your sentence. Okay.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, with our work, obviously not much time to dig too much into the technical side of things, but I think our more unique innovation that we applied here was combining these two types of model together, which you can kind of see summarized in very broad terms here. So machine learning, that's much more the traditional predictive analytics. This is what people are probably most familiar with seeing applied. So we absolutely use this. It's still core to our work. We use it to mainly predict how many people are going to be displaced by conflict events that have occurred. But what we also did was we combined that with agent-based models, which are much less commonly used. These we use to simulate how people are going to move around our geography of interest once they're displaced. And that allows us to make the prediction of where and when we think they'll arrive somewhere, but also allows us to link that origin point with the destination, which allows us to actually validate and test our results. The other big advantage of using both these technologies is that it's allowed us to diversify the data that we're able to pull from. So we're not just stuck using, desperately trying to find enough quantitative data to build these models, which in this sector inevitably brings in lots of questions around data quality. Unfortunately, most in the, particularly in the countries we're most interested in is where data is most likely to be the poorest quality. So absolutely, we still build off quantitative data, but we can also pull in insights from reports, from expert analysis around displaced decision making and movement and how people are moving and how they're choosing their destination, and all of that learning we can apply to our agent-based models. And this is really helpful in this sector where quantitative data is a little bit lacking a lot of the time, but we have enough reports, and kind of experts and kind of softer inputs to fill a library. I also just here want to flag our kind of key partnerships. So we have these really good long-term partnerships with the universities of Virginia and Brunel. They brought a lot of technical expertise and support, which has allowed us to be a lot more confident about our work in this space. Because again, this sector, we're still kind of finding our feet with a lot of this kind of work. Okay, so how does it actually work? So 4 broad steps. So first, we pull in external data on conflicts. So we are not trying to predict conflicts. We are waiting for them to happen. And so for this, we look to dedicated conflict monitoring agencies. So ACLED data, INSO data. That's the kind of data we're interested in. We pull that into the model, and then we pass that to our machine learning model, which predicts, okay, how many people, based on what's happened in the past, roughly how many people do we think are going to be displaced by these conflicts? That gets passed to our agent-based model, which then simulates how these people are going to move around the country. I just want to flag here that, I said then roughly how many people. We are very realistic around the capabilities of this model. We are not trying to build something that says, okay, on Tuesday, you are going to see 136 people showing up, and on Thursday, you're going to have 171. This is what these models do really well, is talk about, okay, where is the weight going to fall? Where are we going to see these arrivals and on what type of scale? And this is where the model performs really well. Then step 4, we package it up, we pass it to our country offices to inform their planning and their work. just an example here of kind of visualizations. This isn't by any means final. It's just a kind of draft piece of work, but it gives an example of the kind of outputs of the model. We've pre-selected a couple of areas here. This is in the north of Mozambique, Cabo Delgado. You can see where, yeah, we're predicting flow into them from some neighboring areas and internally as well. And a little bit of a detail of the kind of more detailed grid on the left. And you'll also see that in the bottom right, we are doing our best to disaggregate those by age and sex, which I'll come back to in a bit more detail. But this gives a sense of what the kind of outputs of the models look like. So in terms of our kind of footprint at the moment, yep, Nigeria, Mozambique, Ukraine. So Nigeria, there we're fully live. Our work is integrated into a wider early warning system. It's quite a mature project. However, the outputs there are purely internal. They haven't left Save the Children. So there it supports operational planning for responses. It leads to things like community sensitization sessions and distributions. Access in that area is pretty tough, so a lot of the time it's also activating partners, kind of briefing them and preparing them for arrivals. Mozambique, that's our current focus. One of the exciting things here is that we will be sharing our results externally with partners within the cluster, so that's really exciting. We visited recently to do some kind of user testing of different outputs, trying to understand how are people already using data to plan their responses? What are they using? Are they looking at the dashboards? Are they using reports? Is it just the raw data? So making sure that when we share our outputs, it'll be something practical and useful, like what that should look like. With each country that we kind of move to, we try and deliver a new kind of some technical improvement, deliver on a priority. So in Mozambique, that was a big jump in complexity for the underlying model. So on the left, that's what we had in Nigeria. That's the network there is settlements, key settlements linked by routes. And that's kind of how our agents can move around. But we were kind of a bit frustrated by this, given that we knew we were introducing bias, why one settlement and not another, why one route and not a different connection. And it was very road-based. So for Mozambique, we turned it into a 10-kilometer square grid and then built the network based on this. You can still see where the main roads are, they're in yellow, and there it's easier to move between them, but different types of movement are much more possible. So it's a big improvement, greater fidelity, but real technical challenge. We had to graduate. We now run it on supercomputers that we have access to through Brunel, the University of Brunel, one of our partners. And then just jumping back to here. So yeah, Ukraine, we're working on at the moment as well. So here it's about, first of all, will it work with this quite different conflict arrangement, but also trying to bring in new data sources. So some stuff that's kind of relevant to what Douglas was talking about. So yeah, sources like Google Trends, social media, satellite imagery. What data is hiding in here that we can use, and where do we apply it? Which section of the model, where can it bring some benefit to this kind of work? Yeah, so that's the current lay of the land. We're always refining and adjusting the kind of core models, but the underlying technology is pretty mature at this point. So the conversations are increasingly turning towards scaling. How do we scale and these kind of questions?
Thanks, Will. Maybe just add, if you can add one more word on it seems like you've had, in terms of the impact this has already had, it seems like some of what you've piloted has already been put into place by or taken advantage of by colleagues in some of these scenarios that you mentioned, or
yeah, absolutely. So it's integrated into this wider early warning system, and so we're always careful because I don't want to lay claim to all of the all of the great outcomes of the wider early warning system, which those numbers are big and they look great. That's not all us. We're part of a kind of broader schema there. I think it'll be really interesting once we roll out in Mozambique, because there is no wider early warning system in place. And so really it's going to be interesting to get a bit more direct cause and effect in place. So we're anticipating doing some more kind of detailed kind of case study work. It's going to be really useful for us to have that as well.
I think I heard both of you correctly, there's a common thread about how do the outputs of these models work in concert with other data and not by itself or in a silo or to replace anything that we're already doing. And so maybe Doug, that's where you left, kind of what we're leaving off before. Maybe we can come back to that as we start looking ahead at what's needed and how do we, as you said, we'll take this to scale or make this replicable in the unfortunately growing number of um, displacement contexts that we're going to be looking at. Doug, where do you see needing the most the most support? What's next? And I know there's a question also from Manuel in the chat for you.
Yeah, there's a few questions, and I'll try to answer these as I go through these last slides because I touch on each of them, I think. Anyways,
Perfect.
um, so I wanted to end thinking about kind of where do we go from where we currently are, and if I start this sentence, the future is in what? I think that a lot of people would be tempted to say artificial intelligence or, digital data, digital trace data, or something fancy. Um, I honestly think that it's a bit more boring than that. I think that the future is in data integration. I think that our big challenge here, there's lots of case studies where you know people all in all different contexts have used really innovative data sets in new ways that demonstrate the power of these data sources, including traditional survey data, all the way up to really new kind of social media data. I think our big challenge, though, is how do we integrate all this stuff together so that we don't end up with 30 different population estimates. We end up with one population estimate that is integrating these things to take advantage of their strengths and weaknesses in one framework. So the NowPop team at Oxford, which is just a very small group of people, we're thinking about this question and we're plugging into crisis response, and we're aiming for a generalizable approach. And what we find in each context we get involved with, that the previous approach doesn't really fit exactly, and we need to rethink. And as we do that, we're trying to work towards a generalizable approach. And so our ultimate goal here is near real-time population nowcasting for data sparse settings. So that could be conflict, but that could be climate-induced displacement. It could also just be for countries that haven't done a census in 20 years. And so this is the general goal. We want to estimate populations by age and sex, and that includes children. And I think, as I said at the beginning, I think this is of particular importance and particularly challenging. We're aiming for a fine geographic scale, as fine a geographic scale as the data will allow us to get to. And when it comes to children, we're previously have been relying on some big assumptions to be able to indirectly estimate child populations. And what we want to be doing more of is using data. And I think the polio vaccination campaign really opened our eyes into how we could be doing that better. And so we're really trying to get objective data-driven population estimates. I'm going to do something here that's I usually try to avoid, but I'm going to put some equations up. And you don't need to really know the equations, but I just want to talk through the concept. Basically, we're trying to estimate a population. We might be trying to say, how many people will there be next week? And if we know how many people there are today, we can estimate better what there will be next week. And then we have these observations that we get from these different data streams. So we know how many Facebook users there are, but how does that relate to this population size? We know how many vaccines have been delivered, but how does that relate to the population size? We may know how many phones have connected to the telecommunications tower. This framework, all these things, Facebook, vaccines, and telecoms, we have data on. The top part, though, what we really want to know about, the population, we can't observe it. And so for us, we are leaning into Bayesian statistics as the solution for this, because it gives a framework that's quite flexible to integrate these multiple data sets. But it also allows us on that top part on population to use established demographic science and what we know about how populations change through time based on births, deaths, and migration to kind of constrain the model so that it's giving reasonable estimates. Um, this is the approach that we've chosen for those reasons. It does have downsides. It's much slower to develop. It takes forever to run the models. And it's weak in all the things that machine learning is very good at. But we're focused on it because it's quite good for a data sparse situation. So that's the kind of methodological development that we are aiming for. And I think the big question for this conversation is what will it take to bring that to fruition? So how do we get that developed, and then how do we ultimately use that to benefit children? And the first thing is partnerships. I mean, partnerships, this won't work without partnerships. All the humanitarians and crisis response professionals and local people have the context and the experience that we don't have and that we completely rely on to be able to do this work successfully. And we have technical expertise that we can think about how to solve these data problems in new ways. We need resources. So we need dedicated staff that can think about these problems over a period of years, because these are hard problems. And working on it, on humanitarian budgets that are, 3 months at a time is really difficult for solving and developing this type of a framework. Another part of the resources is data sharing. And this gets at one of the questions. Like the polio vaccination example, there's lots of data being collected in the field that are quite valuable. But it can be difficult for us as external partners to the United Nations to access those data in their raw form. And so figuring out, I've done work on one project that had data sharing with the World Health Organization, OCHA, and IOM that required separate negotiations. So sorting that out, I think, is going to be important. And then some really practical stuff. I think that we work best together when we have a common goal that's a real problem and we're not working in an academic world. And by us, I mean you all, humanitarians. And so if that makes us become determined to solve the problem if we have a real problem that we're working towards on a real timeline. And the last thing I want to end with is preparation. We do these projects and we plug in during a crisis and are trying to develop these new methods in the middle of a crisis, which is not the best way to do it. And what we, I think, need to do is develop the methods together before the crisis so that we have this kind of framework ready when the crisis comes and we can just then apply it. So that preparation is why I'm here and why I want to talk to all of you to figure out how to make that bit happen. Just a quick, to expand on one of the questions that was asked. What type of data can you all be collecting that can help these types of efforts? A lot of this, I think, is data that's already being collected, like the polio vaccination data. But one thing we've talked about is getting survey responses related to how child populations are related to adult populations. So how many children are traveling with each adult? How many children are traveling with women of different ages and men of different ages, for example, so that we can then use that if we can estimate those adult populations as a data-driven way to inform our estimates of children. And having that type of information coming in some regular period every few months or something to update our models this type of a connection between our two efforts, I think, could be extremely valuable. Let me stop there. I probably went too long and turn it back to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, a handful of follow-ups coming in. So this is great. Just a quick reminder, if as as you do have questions, please do add them to the Q&A tool. It's fine. We will also keep an eye on those in the chat as well. But please do continue to add them to the Q&A button. Will, what's your look ahead? What's
Yeah.
needed? Doug probably mentioned some things that I imagine you would agree with too, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, first, yeah, okay, data access, availability, data providers, the amazing data that they're collecting is what we need to build things like this, but only if we do have good and pretty open and not too many hoops to jump through access to it. And like Douglas said, we really need the raw structured data. I love a dashboard, a
Mhm.
beautifully designed dashboard, fantastic. But my poor data scientist is tired of pulling numbers out of less PDFs these days. I feel like we've mostly moved past that, but now it's like desperately pulling them out of dashboards. Get it on HDX. That's where we're looking. Like it's so useful just to have that raw structured data. Um, FuseNet, at the moment, RIP. It's offline because of the USAID cuts. We really hope it's going to come back one way or the other because that was really our go-to, like our first touch go-to for food security measurements. Um, and then yeah, demographic data, and this is where I think we're really interested in kind of Douglas's work, and also hence our broader interest in IDAC. You saw we break down all our predictions by age and sex. It's really important functionality for us for Save the Children, but it's also some of the data that we worry most about, and we put a big health warning on it because the sources we're having to go to get this starting disaggregated data is often pretty outdated. We're looking at outdated censuses and stuff, it's from really long ago that aren't themselves accounting for the outflows from displacement. So yeah, we're really interested in work in that space. Because yeah, the better data we have there, the better our predictions are going to be. And yeah, and similarly, like we could really do with more insights into the decision making of and the movement kind of characteristics of displaced people. And that can be quantitative or it can be qualitative. Like questions like, how did you choose a destination? How did you choose your route? What was the thing that forced you to move? What was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back? And then yeah, Douglas's questions: who are you like? What group sizes are you traveling in? Who's traveling with who? How do we build a kind of characterization of that? And I think for us, really key, how does it differ with age and sex? Like how are different age and sex categories behaving differently during displacement? So we already have some stuff like this, like men are slightly more likely to take riskier routes, things like this. Children are more likely to travel with women, and elderly people are less likely to displace. These kind of things, but they sound like small things. They're really crucial for our understanding. Here I'd say absolutely a special shout out to Reach, who do sometimes ask these questions. And where we found that work has been so useful for building our models. Um, I'd love more of that, or the funding to do it ourselves, I guess. Um, I think yeah, the other things here, I mean, absolutely funding. So to date, we've kind of been jumping country to country. We're kind of jumping from like lily pad to lily pad to stay afloat. It's been okay, but it means that we don't have this long-term stability, and certainly makes it hard to scale. But it's also left with us with a bit of a tech debt, like that's it's like a buildup of deferred technical pieces of work that we really need to do, but we can't justify doing in the immediate when we're trying to roll out to a new country and so we're building up this bit of a backlog of things like how should we host the models? How can we automate them? Like, let's give it a proper user interface. These things they're really going to need to be dealt with in order for us to scale. But it's hard when we're kind of jumping from country to country and just trying to constantly deliver. And then the last thing I'd say, and I know that this came up in the chat, so yeah, climate.
Mm.
So our work is absolutely conflict focused at the moment. The only real way that we use climate factors is as a input to say, okay, how likely is someone to be displaced by a conflict? So let's say in an area of high food insecurity, there's going to be they're going to be marginally more likely to be displaced by a conflict that takes place in that area. So that's really the only way we're using climate at the moment. We absolutely want to be doing more direct climate displacement work, but it's so much harder than conflict. And I don't even mean like slow onset. Like that's very hard, yes, because you don't have a trigger event. You're trying
Right.
to look at accumulated, you know. So, but even like flooding, yes, you've got a clearly delineated a trigger event, but actually most places that experience a flood, they have a long history of flooding, you know, millennia maybe of flooding, you know. What's changed is that the coping mechanisms that they have to deal with floods has been eroded and is eventually when that coping mechanism collapses, that's when someone is forced to displace or some other kind of negative impact. And it's the scale of the frequency of the floods that is changing that is having this eroding effect. But that's really hard to model because it's not a single flood that's
Yeah.
doing it. We've got some initial work here, but this is where we we definitely welcome good ideas and relevant research into this kind of these questions of how can we predict when the coping mechanisms are going to collapse to the point that they force displacement, and then I guess how do we get that level of insight? How do we do that in a way that's feasible at scale and doesn't rely on really like hands-on constant kind of observation at the community level? I mean, this work, I suspect we're always going to need to be trying to do predictions at a bigger time scale. I don't think
Yeah.
we're ever going to get down to like a 30, 60, 90-day pipeline. I just don't think it works that way. But that's something else we need to work out. What is the correct level of aggregation? Like what kind of prediction for climate displacement look like? I think that's a really interesting space, but it's a tricky one for sure.
And one follow-up to that has come through the chat and maybe is related to what you're saying, what you're talking about on climate. To what extent for what you've been doing, are you able to predict cross-border migration as well?
Yeah, so so with Ukraine, our work there, we've started to look a lot more at cross-border stuff. Our focus has been internal movement, and it's partly because we've kind of, for the purposes of building our models, we have essentially accepted IOM data as reality, right? We have to have a point of reality and so that's kind of what we work to. That's how we validate. That's our kind of go-to. With cross-border, we're integrating, say, UNHCR data. So it's a second version of reality. Those two data sets don't always talk to each other perfectly. And so what we've been doing there is figuring out, okay, how do we work with both? How do we validate for both? And how do we have a model that talks to both, that can be sensibly validated at both internal movement and cross-border stuff. So there's always been cross-border in our models because we have to allow people to leave, and we have some kind of simple rules to qualify the difference between internal and external movement. But until this work with Ukraine, we haven't really validated at that level. It hasn't really been our focus. But
Thank
I will
you.
just say,
Oh
sorry,
yeah.
sorry, that one things we're working towards is regional models. We want to maybe add Niger to Nigeria, and then that would be
Okay, great, right.
yeah,
That would start to get into the
yeah.
so one theme, and I regret we're moving towards our wrapping up time soon already. But one theme I'm seeing that we're seeing in some of the questions that was for both of you. How do we work better, on Will, on your side, from quote unquote agency and geo perspective, how do we work better with academic partners? And Doug, you started talking about this a little bit about what's needed. How, from an academic side, what do we need to be doing differently or better from an agency side to facilitate this? And you listed a number of things, but for example, is there just a minimum technical proficiency and fluency that you need people to have, or is it the legal agreements, or like what if you could hone in on the one or two things that from each of your perspectives we could do to improve these partnerships, which you both clearly depend upon for this work? Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the key question. I guess from my perspective, if I were just going to pick one thing, the one thing would be a partnership that values the preparation work. So we come into these partnerships quite easily when there's this urgent need, and we're very happy to step into those projects. But we always end up with these solutions that are very context specific and put together very quickly. And so if I were going to choose one thing, it would be a partnership that is designed around the idea of let's put together the methodological toolbox in advance, take some time to do that well. And that way, when the crisis comes, we're ready and we have that toolbox that has been validated and we know is robust to be used with various different types of data that we would expect from different contexts. It's that partnership for
Yeah,
preparation,
the
methodological
preparatory.
development.
Thanks. What about you, Will?
I think all I'll say here is I'll just highlight like how useful our university relationships have been. Like when I came into this job, I thought it was going to be like I thought it was going to be like Google and Facebook and like all these kind of
Right.
like, tech partners, like private sector tech partners. And actually, and we've worked with some of them. We've had those relationships, but actually the most valuable relationships have been these really long-term academic partnerships because I think there's actually loads of shared space. I think yeah, there's a keenness to kind of link the kind of academic ideas and the operational footprint, but also just similar ideas of like when you're exploring this space and you want that long-term commitment, which we do need, these projects aren't fast because it is a mix of operational impact and academic exploration. I think, yeah, they've been really valuable partnerships. So I really encourage people to, yeah, like go knocking at the door of your local university because yeah, it really has been it really has been useful for us.
Thank you. We have so many questions that are going to unfortunately remain unanswered due to time. I'm going to invite for anyone who is able to stay on for a few more minutes. And I don't know if Doug and Will, I should have asked if you even have a few more minutes. You've already given us so much time. So for those who had a question that they'd still love to ask, we'll stay on for just a couple more minutes and see if we can get to some of them. We will officially close though for in the next 30 seconds because we know many of you do have commitments or bedtimes to get to, depending on where you are in the world. So our one request is that we would love your thoughts on anyone else that we need to hear from in an upcoming series or upcoming session like this. Anyone else doing interesting data technology work with AI, machine learning, any frontier data technology to address the challenges of children on the move. And so let us know. And speaking put it in the chat or reply to an email. And we will be back here in a month or so. We're going to send everyone on this webinar an email. We are planning a session on Earth observation for children on the move, satellite imagery, machine learning. And so you can also stay tuned to the IDAC LinkedIn social media handle, LinkedIn IDAC. So, but we will send you an email as well. Will and Doug, we'll stay on for a second, but we are so grateful on behalf of everyone who has joined and is now, many of whom are also we're walking out the door. I appreciate all the time and thought you've put into sharing your experiences with us. And we, I know we've all learned a great deal, and hopefully this is the start of collaboration amongst some of our colleagues who are on this call. So I'm seeing many thanks in the chat, and we're going to capture a lot of those comments before we close off the session so that we can incorporate those comments into follow-up posts and your questions. So, but thank you, Will. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
So bye to folks who are heading out. What we'll do is we'll just use if there is anyone who stays for a second, we'll ask you to who had written a question, you can use the raise your hand chat so that we know you're actually here, and we'll go on for maybe another just couple of minutes for some of the burning questions that may have, if you had one that you are still interested in. So yeah, a few questions on, I guess, on data privacy, understandably, which maybe I'd be curious to just get your kind of high level, both of your high level comments on. I think that would probably be something we want to also address in any kind of recap. I know there's a lot of disaggregation happening, but maybe just kind of for the record, how are you each addressing, since we're dealing with, you know, we don't want to make any assumptions. We're dealing with obviously minors and children. Um, what are the practices or principles you have in place?
Yeah, I can start off on that. Yeah, certainly. I think one of the reasons that our Nigeria work never went external was that we didn't, even though the kind of settlements and the links between them weren't specific roads, they were kind of connections between them. It still, on the face of it, was predicting the movement of very vulnerable populations in very specific ways that we didn't really feel comfortable with doing. Um, with Mozambique, where it's going to go external, it's basically we talk about having two levers we can pull here, right? There's the level of it's controlling access to the results, and it's then the level of aggregation that you know that you're providing. And so I think, yeah, certainly when we're going external, we're going to be providing a much higher aggregation level. So we certainly wouldn't do it at the grid level, you know, the 10-kilometer grid. Instead, yeah, we'll be aggregating it to regions, to districts, which makes sense because that's also generally we found what existing planning is being done on the basis of. When you look at, you know, IOM data, it's generally done at the regional level. So it makes sense, it fits in. And I think that's a level of aggregation that we're comfortable with. Like case to case, that may change, and you might want to go a little bit higher, or you might want to pull the other lever
Hmm. Hmm.
and restrict access a bit more.
Hmm.
And so I think those are the two things that we think about.
Well, Doug.
Yeah, it's similar for us.
Yeah.
I would break this into two pieces. One is the input data that we're accessing that goes into the models, and then the other is the population estimates that we produce. On the input data side, you know, there are individual level cell phone data, for example, out there. Um, for our work, um, you know, our team really doesn't think that that's necessary. And so we are usually requesting data be shared with us in aggregate form unless it's essential, which so far it hasn't been to get individual level. So trying to minimize the data as it comes in. And on the output side, this is where we really rely on our partnerships. So we work with OCHA's data responsibility team, and in each country context, they will develop across agencies, develop an information sharing protocol. And we've worked with them to include our daily population estimates in there and identify at which geographic level it can be made public, or otherwise, what are the actual protocols for sharing it internally. So we just rely on those partnerships to help us make those decisions.
I just with the mention of mobile data, yeah, my ears pricked up. I mean, yeah, we often talk about mobile data as just being like the if we could access mobile data for all these countries that we work in, I mean, it would be the most transformational. I
Mm.
mean, that data is so valuable, it's so useful, and partly also for there was some yeah, there was a piece of work that actually we talked to recently as an IDAC team, where it was they had managed to get access to some mobile data, and it was really good at also predicting where people were going to go, because you can see that people are already linked. They're making calls between location X and Y. When something happened, when a conflict breaks out at location X, location Y is going to be there, you know. And so this data is so
Right.
valuable. It's also so hard to get access to. It is so difficult. You know, it's really like fragmented. You know, each country you got different operators. It's a frustration because it's so tantalizingly, you know, right there and so valuable. We just can't find a way to consistently access it. And I'm not sure one for the foreseeable does exist.
This gets to something that Manuel had asked in the chat here, just about would it if you were able to get connectivity data and data on when connectivity was had been dropping or not, as another input, would that be useful? Would that play a role? I think
Yeah,
this is more as an idea, suggestion, or potential. Yeah.
yeah, maybe I'll jump in. So this was a major problem for our early population estimation
Right,
in the Gaza Strip, where there were widespread network outages.
right.
Um, we were actually getting data from NetBlocks, which does really high temporal resolution measurements of network connectivity. They don't share the data really in the raw form, but they tweet about it, and they're tweeting their graphs of connectivity. And we
Huh.
we extracted the data from their
Pulled it from
graphs.
the, wow.
But it ended up not helping us all that much
Okay.
because, and it's just a case specific thing, because Facebook do some smoothing of their counts of active users. So if the network drops for a day, like it was in Gaza, it dropped for 24 hours, the Facebook user count doesn't really drop right away. And so the smoothing that Facebook was doing basically made it where the network connectivity data wasn't as useful to us. And we were sort of left unable to, in a satisfying way, account for changes in network connectivity, which were, I think, affecting our population estimates.
Um, Another one that had come in for you while you're on estimates. I might just read it directly on the Bayesian models. You're building the conditionals based on existing data, Facebook penetration, connectivity might be another, but could we get new data in to build some critical conditional probabilities for children? For example, periodic checks in the number of children traveling per woman, as you mentioned. Could we apply, this might be a different, yeah, and could we apply population nowcasting? This is actually slightly different, but could we apply population nowcasting to generate sampling frame for a cluster survey? For example, applying that to Gaza Strip today.
Yeah. So on the first question, the answer is yes, definitely. And this is our kind of larger strategy is for a new data set, like a survey
Hmm.
data set, we are then going to try to develop a statistical data model that relates how that survey response is correlated or somehow related to the true population size. So each of those data models can plug into our larger base population model. And so basically, each time we get a new data set, we're trying to develop a new data model for it. And we could do that with a survey. On the question about sampling frames, we actually did this in Ukraine for the multi-sectoral needs assessment that was done in 2023. We worked with Reach to, we provided high resolution population estimates at 1 kilometer grid, and they used that in parts of Ukraine to develop the sampling frame that was used for that MSNA survey. This is definitely possible in one of our aims, but it's dependent on us having data that allows us to get to a fine enough geographic scale to be able to, give it an estimate that's useful for that purpose.
Thanks. I appreciate the overtime. There's a nearly 50 people who are willing to stay on as well. But I do also want to acknowledge other commitments and we'll just want to ask if if there are any kind of closing comment from either of you, something that you've seen in the chat that you wanted to respond to, or in the Q&A that we didn't get to that kind of sparked a thought that you'd want to close on or just acknowledge before we close for the second time.
Um, I think I'll just say, look, I think we've hit most of the kind of
Yeah,
pertinent things. I think we've hit most of the
yeah,
questions, so thanks for those.
sure.
We have a really open door policy. If you want to talk more about the technology or you have some bright idea, particularly on like the climate or then yeah, please reach out. We're always happy to have a conversation. We like to be really open. I mean, semi-open source in so much as we're actually, able to be. Again, one of those things in our kind of tech debt space is that we'd like to be fully open source. We just haven't had the time, and the wherewithal to kind of get there. But yeah, please do get in touch if this is relevant to you, if you'd like to discuss further. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Will. Yeah, Doug, and yeah.
I'll just I'll second that, and thank you for organizing, first of all, Michael, Kiraki, Manuel, and others, but for everyone that attended and asked great questions. Really appreciate that. And yeah, we also are really looking for partnerships and collaborative relationships where we can learn from all of you. So please get in touch with us, and would be more than happy to schedule some follow-up conversations to see where we can go from here. So yeah, just thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, this is definitely a small and growing space. Kiriak, I don't know if you have any other closing comment on the same lines, but we're definitely trying to connect the dots. We have that's part of the purpose of this working group. If you're interested in joining this innovation working group for IDAC, please let us know. Mainly, again, just trying to connect the dots as much as possible through these webinars, through a compendium we'll be sharing of all projects that we are aware of. So please do reach out, raise a hand, either reply to one of the emails that you got, raise a hand in the webinar chat, comment on LinkedIn, however you want to raise a flag that you want to get in touch. We are eager to connect. Very small space of people here trying to solve these challenges. So we look forward to working with you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be sharing the recording and hopefully some recaps that we can do as well. So with that, much appreciations, especially to those of you who stayed on or are now 15 minutes late to your next meeting. Thank you for prioritizing this over your other colleagues. And we will look forward to seeing you again very soon for our next session.
Thanks all. Cheers.
All right. Thanks
Thank you,
again. Take
everyone.
care. Bye-bye.